Welcome to the Spiritually Ignited Paradox Literature Language of the Heart gathering. We have invited Chad P. from New Jersey to share a message of depth and weight from the heart on the topic of step one, apply to all 12 steps. You have 40 minutes. Take it away.
Hi guys, my name's Chad Payne. I'm an addict. I am happy to be here. Wait a minute, let's see. Okay, there we uh-oh. Having technical difficulties. Okay, here we go. We good. You guys have been good the whole time. It's me that's not good. Okay. Um, I'm glad to be here, and I love listening to the readings at the beginning of the meeting, and I feel like there are different types of 12-step recovery, and I thought when I got here that I was one of those who, if you just got the dope off me, everything would be okay. And it was a pretty dis it was pretty it's been pretty disturbing for over 20 years now to find out that that's not the case for a guy like me. I do see those in recovery who can come in and work some version of the steps and have a spiritual awakening and then go out and do some prayer and maybe some meditation and help some people and live a pretty happy, easy life. And that is true for some in recovery. And then some of those people can also drift and stop working a program for a while and still stay sober, but maybe get to kind of feeling bad and then have to come back and do another 90 meetings in 90 days, or come back and up their spiritual game a little bit and then get back to a place where they're doing well. But what I heard when I came onto this meeting, based on what you guys were reading and what you were talking about, is those of you who are responsible for keeping this meeting going are maybe of another type. And that type is those who don't stay sober very long without a really intense practice of the 12 steps, or maybe the type who might stay sober but might go deep into untreated alcoholism or untreated addiction. And guys, I tell you right now, I'm capable of burning my life to the ground and hurting a lot of people without ever putting any substance into my system. So, what I have to do is I have to remember that even though I may be around some in recovery who maybe don't have to do this at a real high level, I do. I have to do it at a high level. And when I say a high level, I don't mean that from a place of self-righteousness, like I work a better program. It just means that I have to make sure that I'm doing those simple things, because I can fall into self-will and into untreated addiction, and the drink or the drug could easily be coming well before I ever see any hint of it. So that can be a dangerous place for me. And I'll tell you just a little bit about my history, but what I really want to get into is more current experience with step one. My history looked like I in the maybe there were a few times in the beginning where I come from an alcoholic family. Uh, not an abusive family, but a dysfunctional family. And there's certainly 5 out of 6 of us have been members of 12-step fellowships at some point, and maybe still are. My stepdad is about 2 years behind me. I have 23 years of sobriety. He has 21. And mom, Al-Anon saved her life, and then the brothers and sisters have dipped a toe in here and there. So, it's been all over my family. I certainly came up with a spiritual malady, and I certainly felt a great sense of relief once I first started to drink. And I put it off. I held off as long as I could because I saw what it did in the rest of my family. So I held off as long as I could, but I think I waited too long. I really needed a drink way before I took one. But that in itself is not what makes me an alcoholic or an addict. And I want to talk just a little bit about what does. The first thing that does, there's a line on page 30 that says, "We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery." I actually like this version a little bit better than the one on the wall because I like this idea of a full concession to this idea that I'm an addict. Rather than admitting, to me, it's stronger words. This full concession to my innermost self. And if you want to know if I fully conceded to my innermost self that I have this illness, don't ask me because I'll tell you what I think. Watch me. If I fully conceded to my innermost self that I have what this big book describes, you're going to see me doing things I wouldn't otherwise do. And I'm not going to be doing those things out of virtue. I'm going to be doing those things because not only do I have the experience of addiction, I also have an understanding of addiction, and I've got this full concession to my innermost self that I have it. And I didn't always have that, and there have been times in my sobriety where I haven't had that. But a full concession means you can watch my feet and see that I'm doing something different. And then it goes on to say, what is this full concession to? What am I fully conceding to? And what I'm fully conceding to my innermost self is that I'm alcoholic, is what the book says, or that I'm an addict. And and uh and if I'm gonna fully concede to my innermost self that I'm an addict, then I need to know what that means. And it seems trivial. Like it seems to me like, well, of course I am one. I'm here, right? I mean, who would show up in a meeting of AA or CA or any other A and not be a person who qualifies for this program? But that's not the case. There are some who show up who maybe don't meet these so-called requirements to be a real addict or a real alcoholic. But that's not really the important part of it. The important part of it is I need to understand deep down within that I qualify as who this book is talking about. So what is it that makes me qualify and that I'm alcoholic or that I'm addict? Two things. Two things make me qualify. The first thing is I've got a drug problem. And what my drug problem looks like is once I start doing drugs, I lose control over the amount that I take. And in the beginning, what that looked like for me is we're getting off work early on a Friday. We're going to go hit happy hour at the bar. And we're going to have a couple drinks, shoot some pool, blow off some steam, have a good time, and then go home. And some of us are going to go home to families with their kids and things like that. Some of us, maybe we're just going to go home and clean up and get a bite to eat and go out on a Friday night. But that's the plan, right? And what happens for me is I get to the bar and we're having a good time and we're having a few drinks. I get a couple in me. Happy hour's coming to an end. Those have gone down smooth. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'll have another one. And then, that one was good too. I think I'll have another one. Happy hour's over. My coworkers are going home. And and then I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think I'll have one more, but I've got a problem. I'm running late now, so I better call home and come up with a story. It's not a lie, it's a story. And the story is I got to work late, so I'm going to be a few more minutes. And then that few more minutes and few more drinks goes on and on until the bar's closed and I'm looking for the after party. And then next thing you know, it's Monday. Maybe I show up at work, maybe I don't, but the paycheck is gone. But now, if you move that down the road a little ways, from the beginning of my drinking career to the end of my drug career, what it looked like toward the end, I really relate to this passage on page 37, where it says, in some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk. And it goes on down to say, we now see that when we began to drink deliberately, instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. So what that looked like for me toward the end was I rarely said, let's have two drinks. What I said most often was, let's get drunk or let's get high and have a good time. And I'll tell you one quick story before I move into what the real topic is here today. And that story is on this day. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but we all know in here how deadly and tragic the overdose is. I mean, most of us in here have lost someone that we cared about to this illness. But we were hanging around one time talking about this person overdosed and that one did and how sad it is. And then I remember my sponsor said, "Well, the overdose is very tragic, but you know what's maybe even worse than the overdose?" And we're like, "What?" And he said, "The deadly underdose." Anybody in here ever had to live with the underdose on a regular basis? I mean, it seems like the last years of my addiction or the last years of my drug use were one day after another of dealing with the underdose. But on this day, on the day I'm referring to, was one of those rare good days when I had a big bag of dope. Oh, and I'm a meth addict. So a big bag of dope meant we're going to get high and we're going to go out and do stuff and we're going to have a good time, right? So that's the plan. I tell my buddy Shane, check this out. Let's get high, let's go have some fun, right? Okay, 2 hours later or less, the dope is gone. And I'm showing him how we're going to break into my grandma's house and steal her stuff and sell it or trade it for more dope. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is what happens to me once I put drugs in my body is regardless of what the plan was, I lose control. I'm not a sociopath. I had a tremendous amount of guilt around the fact that I stole my grandma's stuff. And let me tell you why my grandma was a good target. My grandma was a good target because she was in a nursing home recovering from a stroke. So when I put drugs in my system and then when I run out, now we're going to see what Chad's addiction looks like. Because what my addiction looks like when I run out is I'm willing to hurt anyone who stands in the way or who I can use to my advantage to continue to get high. Mm. So that's the drug problem. Dr. Silkworth solves the drug problem before we even get to page one. And if this doesn't disturb you, I don't know what will. But on Roman numeral XXX, Roman numeral 30, he says, the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. That gives me chills today to think about entire abstinence. Here's the solution to a drug problem. Don't do drugs. Problem solved. And that works for the hard drinker or the hard user. We just read about that in our little big book study Julie and I are doing for our sponsees. Uh, the book says we have a certain type of hard drinker, and he may look just like the real alcoholic, but if a sufficiently strong reason becomes operative, this man can stop or moderate, but not the real alcoholic. So when it comes to the real alcoholic or the real addict, not only do I have a drug problem, I have a mental problem. Not only do I have the inability to control my drugs once I put them into my system, I have a mental illness that takes away the power of choice. And what that means is stone cold sober, looking back over the last few weeks or few months or few years of all the damage I did last time I went on a spree, all the reasons that I have to never do this again, I do it again. Stone cold sober, I pick up again. Just got out of jail, just got out of detox, just got out of treatment, just walked out of a meeting. Come on. They said they're going to take my kids. I'm going to go back to prison, lose my job, get kicked out of the house. I exert my willpower with all I've got. That's what it looked like for me. I had a bad wreck a few years before I got sober, and I had my first surrender. My first surrender looked like this. I was in the hospital for about a month, and it was obvious that I had no control over my drinking. I had no control over my use of methamphetamines and other drugs. I had no control, and the consequences kept piling up and piling up and piling up. And I was trying to manage it. I was trying to just smoke weed and drink beer, take a few pills occasionally, just do it on the weekends. All that stuff I'd been trying to do, and none of it worked. So I finally realized as I lay in that hospital with my big dysfunctional family who I'd pushed out of my life showing up, I look them in the eye and I said, I'm done. I'm never doing this again. I'm staying sober 100%, no drinking, no drugs. I'm going to go back to school, quit working construction like I had been working it all anyway. I'm going to quit working construction. I'm going to stop hanging out with these friends. They're obviously the problem. I'm going to straighten up my life and be a good father, a good husband, a good son, a good citizen. I will fulfill my potential. And the main part of that I realize today is that I'm never going to get loaded again. I get out of the hospital. I'm on a walker. My jaws are wired shut. I've got staples and stitches all over me. I can't raise my right arm above my shoulder. And within 2 days, I'm staying out all night drinking whiskey and smoking meth off tinfoil. That's what it looks like when I quit. And then that began the quitting years. And I quit over and over and I started up over and over. And those were the years where I got homeless and where I really started hurting those around me. I'd been hurting those around me for a long time. The ones that wouldn't totally shut me out of their lives, I continued to hurt. I embarrassed myself over and over, day after day, as the scum of the earth locked me out of their houses. Wouldn't let me in. And finally, through a strange series of events, I was given the gift of sobriety. I spent about a year hanging around in meetings, showing up early, staying late, being the best member I could be, setting up the meetings, tearing down the meetings, being on all the committees, chairing meetings, being as good a member as I knew how to be, but I wasn't working any steps and I was about ready to leave. And at that time, a man showed up through a strange series of events and he 12 stepped me. He used his experience to explain addiction to me in a way that I could lay it up against my experience and realize that I'm screwed, that I'm in really bad shape, that I'm not going to stay sober on my own power. And then he offered to take me through the 12 steps and we began this journey. Now, the first thing I want to say about that ties back into step one is I had what a lot of people in Cocaine Anonymous and many other fellowships have. I had a problem with God. I had a step two problem. I didn't want anything to do with God. I thought it was stupid. I thought anyone who believed in it was stupid. I thought I was way more complicated and way more intelligent than any of that kind of thing. But what I had going for me was the gift of two things: desperation to never go back the way I'd been, and an understanding of powerlessness over the first drink. That's what I had going for me. I understood that I was powerless, and I was desperately willing to do whatever it took to not go back to the way that I had been. So, what happened is I worked these steps not because I believed in God, not because I believed in the steps, not even because I believed in AA or CA, or actually at that time for me it was NA. Not because I believed in any of that. I worked the steps because I believed in the power of addiction over me. And what happened is, in working the steps, I had an experience with a God I didn't believe in. And I want more and more of that today. The more I get, the more I want. So we embarked on a journey. A few years later, I moved down to Austin, Texas. I fell in love with the big book. I went back through the steps the way they're outlined in this book, and I've been doing it with a couple of breaks here and there, which I'll get into later, for the last 20 years or so. at a pretty high level and trying to help as many other guys as I can do it at a high level. And it's been the greatest gift I ever could have asked for. But what I want to talk about today is something I learned when I got down there. I found myself at a table in Charlie Parker's house with Charlie sitting on one side and Mark Houston sitting on the other. And I mentioned both those guys first and last name. First off, we lost Charlie almost 3 years ago, and Mark died in about 2010. But the reason I say their names is if you've never listened to either one of those guys, go find some of their talks and listen to them. Charlie's talk on step one is probably the best I've ever heard, and Mark's stuff on step one, steps 10 and 11, inventory, all this process are really, they're mind blowing, and listen to these guys revolutionize the way that I see recovery today. And then at that table we would have at the end of the meeting, Katie would walk in and she would really set us all straight. So listen to her too, KDP. If you've never listened to KDP or Charlie or Mark Houston, give them a listen, and maybe they'll blow your socks off like they did mine. Mark would talk about current experience with step one. I had 5 years at the time. It drove me nuts that he would talk about current experience with step one. I didn't understand it. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm sober 5 years. I don't have any current experience with step one. It didn't make any sense to me. And it makes much more sense to me today than it did back then. And one of the things that I've heard people say, I've heard it years ago and I've heard it some here lately. I hear it sometimes in New Jersey. And someone from behind the podium will say something like this: the only step I've ever worked perfectly is step one. And I know what you mean. What you mean by that is I've made many mistakes throughout my sobriety, but I haven't picked up a drink. And I totally relate to that. I've made many mistakes throughout my sobriety, but I have not picked up a drink. But I also think that that statement illustrates a misunderstanding of step one, because step one doesn't say don't drink. Step one says you can't not drink. You're powerless over the first drink. That's what step one says. So the way that I see it is if I work step one perfectly, that means that I have total reliance on God, that I never miss a nightly review. I never walk around with a resentment or dwell in fear. I always practice the 10th step as soon as I catch a disturbance. I spend all my spare time growing closer to God and working with others. I show up in the fellowship consistently with a good attitude and a sense of gratitude and enthusiasm. I mean, should I go on? Does anybody do that? I mean, the way Charlie would put it is if you do those things, we will build a statue in your honor at the General Service Office because you'll be the first. So what happens is when we look at current experience with step one, what I really need to take a look at is, do I believe today that I have alcoholism? Do I believe I have addiction? Am I in touch with that? How much am I in touch with that? Or have I started to forget? Have I started to fall under a delusion? On page 30, it said the rest of that from where I read, where I said this is the first step in recovery. Then it says the delusion that we are like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. So it says there's a delusion here that has to be smashed. And that delusion is that I'm like other people. Or another way of putting that is that I don't have alcoholism or addiction. Okay, that's a delusion. When I walked in the doors of Narcotics Anonymous when I was brand new, I was under no delusion that I was like other people. One thing I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was very clear that I was not like other people. But here's what happens. As a guy like me stays sober and does a little work and surrenders and commits to this program, I begin to experience what we call the gifts of sobriety. Maybe I get the relationship I was looking for. Maybe I make some money. Maybe I get my bills paid. Maybe I'm not a bum anymore. Maybe I'm driving a nice car, living in a nice house. Maybe I'm starting a family. Maybe I own a business. Maybe I have employees working for me. Maybe I'm involved in service at the area level or the district level or even the general service. All these things. I'm busy living a full life, and people look up to me. Anybody experience that as some of the gifts of sobriety? I haven't experienced all those things, but I've experienced some of them. And what happens and if you're not getting those things, then hmm, we should be getting those things. Not all of them. I still have struggles with some of those things. Some of us get them way faster than others. I feel like I'm on the slow track. That's okay though. But as we get those things, what happens is we begin to fall under this delusion. Have you ever talked to someone, those of you who have years of sobriety, have you ever sat down with a person, maybe it's a coworker or maybe it's a family friend or something like that, who didn't know you back in the old days, and for some reason you're telling them your story, or at least parts of it? For instance, I was a high school teacher for about 15 years, and I would talk with some of my coworkers, and we got pretty close. And when it would come up, I would tell them, yeah, I was a homeless meth addict. And you know what they would say? No way. I would never think that you would be a drug addict. Anybody ever experience that? Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that people out there believe that a guy like me is like other people. But what's dangerous is when I start to believe it. See, the truth is, I'm not like other people. I have to do things other people don't have to do. I worked with a guy, very healthy, fit, active guy who had type 1 diabetes, and he had it since he was a child. And he had to give himself an insulin shot every day, and he had to monitor his glucose and his insulin and all that. I would have never guessed this guy had anything wrong with him. He looked just like other people. But had he fallen under the delusion that he was like other people and he stopped treating his diabetes, he would die, right? And that's the way I have to look at my addiction, is to realize that I'm not like other people and I have to treat this differently than other people have to. And sometimes that can even happen in the rooms of 12-step recovery. Sometimes that can even happen in the rooms, because I have to remember, I've had home groups before where I'm surrounded by people who may not have to do everything that I have to do in order to stay sober and live a peaceful, useful life of freedom. Sometimes there are folks that don't have to do what I have to, and that's fine. That's fine. If I didn't have to do what I do today, I wouldn't do it either. It's not like I do more than other people out of virtue. And there's a lot of people that do more than I do. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I do it out of virtue. I do it because if I want to be free and sober and useful and at least occasionally happy, there are things I have to do. But if I lose sight of that because I'm falling under the delusion, here's an interesting thing about this sentence. It really only needs to say the delusion we are like other people has to be smashed. But there's a part in the middle that says, or presently may be. This book was divinely inspired. I see so many places in this big book where I look at and I go, there's no way a guy with 3 years understood this much. And I truly believe, and Bill believed it too. I've heard him say it in an interview. A guy said something about the 11th step, and Bill said, I've never really understood the 11th step. And the guy said, Bill, you wrote it. And Bill said, no, I didn't. I was inspired. So I think he was inspired to put these four words between these commas, or presently may be, because this is a delusion that I tend to fall in years into sobriety. So here's what happens. I call it the perfect storm. I get the gifts of sobriety. Here come the gifts, right? And the gifts look like a busy, full life. So I get busy. And now it's no problem to be busy until I'm too busy to make conscious contact with God every morning. Or I'm too busy to take an honest consideration of what's blocked me from God throughout the day every night. Or I've become so busy I forgot to watch for that internal disturbance or that external collision throughout the day. Or I'm so busy that, yeah, I got a couple of sponsees that don't really call me anymore. But if I look at the last week, I've spent maybe 10 minutes working with other addicts or alcoholics, or maybe spent 5 minutes carrying the message because I shared at my home group. Maybe I haven't written inventory in, whoa, we start counting back to when that was. That's been a while. Maybe I was halfway through with my amends and I was amazed and I put them in the back of the drawer and I haven't touched them since. And I have good reason for that because you don't understand. I run a business and I have two young kids at home. I can't be running out and doing all the things I used to do. And while that may be true, maybe I'm also not doing what I can do. And that's what I ask the busy guys all the time. I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm asking you, are you doing what you can? And a lot of times, what I find is that a guy who may be too busy to work an AA program does find the time to spend an hour and a half scrolling through his phone off and on throughout the day, and I have that experience. I know that. So the gifts, I get busy. I get too busy. There's an old saying that I love. I don't know where it came from, but it's meditate for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, then meditate for an hour a day. Because busy doesn't make me need less program, it makes me need more program, and I'll actually be more effective and more efficient because I won't be burning up energy foolishly. So we really got to watch for when we get too busy to practice a program. And I remember I heard Charlie on the phone say to a guy one time, he said, well, if you're too busy to work a program and you're an alcoholic, well, then you might be too busy. Like, oh, that one hits home, you know. So I'm busy. Now, what happens? The gifts of sobriety bring on stress. The family, the career, the business, the service structure, all those things bring stress into my life, mainly because I'm not working a program and I'm falling asleep and I'm living in self-will, and now I got the stress adding up. The ego has reemerged. Spiritually, I'm falling asleep. The ego's waking back up in full force, and now it's running the show, and I'm walking around sound asleep, dreaming I'm awake. I'm physically awake. I'm emotionally awake. I'm mentally awake. The ego's running rampant, and spiritually, I'm sound asleep. Mm. And now I'm under the delusion that I'm like other people. You won't catch me saying it. If you come up to me and say, hey, Chad, are you still an addict? I would say, oh, yes, absolutely. But if you watch me, if you were to follow me around with a drone watching me all day long, would it look like I believe I'm an addict, or would it look like maybe I forgot? And now here's the really tricky part. A few years into this deal, especially for those of us who come in and we work the steps and we submit to this program and we have a crazy awakening and the God consciousness starts to flow and people say he's on the pink cloud, what happens is that flow starts to knock some things loose deep down in here. Some of those blockages that I had covered up and kept suppressed because I wasn't willing to look at them and because the spirit wasn't flowing. Now spirit's knocking some of that stuff loose, and here comes the darkness. How many of you have thought you were pretty good, and then a few years into sobriety, all of a sudden things start to come up that comes out in my work life, in my relationships, in my financial life, in things like that, and I find I'm very disturbed. For me, it was mostly in romantic relationships. I have had more darkness come up in my relationship with Julie than any other area of my life, and it's things that I didn't even know I had in me. And maybe it's things from childhood that the first time I took a drink or the first time I did a drug, I began the process of pushing that stuff down. And now, somewhere in sobriety, because I've had a surrender and things have started to happen and stir up, now that stuff is coming up. So what's happened is I've tapped into the darkness, and I have to tap into the darkness. That's where I find God. I don't find God in the darkness. I find what blocks me from experiencing God in the darkness. It's a necessity, but it's dangerous if I've fallen under the delusion that I'm no longer an addict. Because now the darkness is coming up, and when I need the 12 steps the most, I'm too busy to do what it takes to get free. And I've fallen under the delusion that I don't have to do what I had to do in year one. And what I can tell you guys today is I have to do much more today than I had to do in year one. I have to do much more today. It doesn't seem fair, but I actually like it because I like what I get out of it. I want to tell you a little bit about my experience with this, and I tell you, there's so much message around here for the new guy, and there should be more message for the new guy coming in here than anything else. That's where we need to place most of our effort. But sometimes we need a little more message for the guy who's been around here a little while and is suffering in untreated alcoholism and looking around at all these happy people in the rooms of recovery and being unwilling to admit honestly what's going on with me because I shouldn't be this way. I should be better. I've had lots of guys reach out to me like this, but the one I want to bring up now is a guy called me, and it was I didn't get I didn't answer the call. I got a voicemail later, and it was the most direct to the point voicemail. And here's what he said. He said, "My name's so and so. I'm 15 years sober. My wife is divorcing me. My kids won't speak to me. I'm filing bankruptcy in my business, and I want to die. Can you help me?" And that's the guy that sometimes we need some more message for to understand how we can suffer in sobriety. Because the still suffering alcoholic, the still suffering addict may be sitting next to you picking up a 10-year chip, and still suffering. So I think it's important that we talk about that. And what that looked like for me is there was a period where Julie and I we're 13 years in this relationship, and we've had some struggles. We're in round three. And if you know what that means, then you've also had some crazy relationship struggles in sobriety. What that means is we broke up twice for a long period of time in this 13 years. And hopefully round three is the last round. That's what we're shooting for. It takes a lot of one of my favorite things that Katie says is she says one alcoholic in a relationship is a lot. And we have two. So and two of the real deal, two of the drift into untreated alcoholism pretty quickly types. But we had a period where we were both being dishonest with each other. We were both engaged in some dishonest behavior. And if you would have asked me, "So Chad, are you and Julie still together?" I would have said, "Well, that's a long answer." It was kind of one of those things. And some of you guys know about that. Sometimes that's not a simple yes or no question. We were in one of those periods. And she was engaged in some dishonest behavior over here, and I was engaged in some dishonest behavior too. And I'm doing some steel on steel work with a couple of guys that I sponsor. And thank God for an understanding of spiritual consent, which is if two people have spiritual consent with each other, what that means is those two people have the privilege and the responsibility to point out what they see in the other person. And in that steel on steel exercise, it's all about spiritual consent. And we do it through the path of consideration. So it might look like this. If you say to me, "Oh gosh, I haven't done a nightly review in a month," I might say to you, "Well, I'd like to offer for your consideration that maybe you've forgotten that you're an addict and that self-examination is an important piece of recovering, staying connected to God, and ultimately staying clean. Are you willing to consider that?" And then the other person, the only acceptable answer is, "Yes, I will consider that." Because We don't want the ego to jump in and go into self-defense mode. And Bob B, one of my heroes in AA, sometimes talks about this kind of, I don't know if he calls it this, but the way it was explained to me is kind of like this death pact that we sign with each other, where you don't talk about my gambling, I won't talk about your pornography. And if you do, there's going to be a heavy price to pay. Whereas spiritual consent is just the opposite of that. Spiritual consent says it's my responsibility to call you on that if I have that relationship with you. So in this exercise, what came up through the questions that I answered in this Steel on Steel exercise is that I had a stellar program. I was practicing step 11 every day. I was practicing the 10th step and talking to my sponsor, except there's one thing that I wasn't looking at. I wasn't talking to my sponsor about it. I wasn't putting it on my nightly review. I wasn't praying about it. And the reason is because I didn't want to stop doing it because I needed some information. And the way that I was acting out was in a way to get information in a dishonest way. And what I kept telling myself is when you get enough information, then you can make a decision and we'll stop doing that and then we'll be principled. And when I told those two guys what I was doing, one of them said to me, he said, Chad, is it possible that because you practice steps 10 and 11, because you write inventory, because you have a home group, because you're involved in service, because you sponsor a lot of guys, because you speak from behind the podium, is it possible that you think you're immune to the first drink? And all I could say was, yes, yes. Not only is that possible, it's absolutely true. And I had forgotten that a guy like me cannot afford to act dishonestly, cannot afford to have this lack of transparency, cannot afford to live an unprincipled life and be unwilling to do anything about it. So what had happened is I had forgotten what it means to be an addict and forgotten what I have to do to treat it. Hmm. And guys, I'm actually right now going back through the steps. I can't see that time since I'm spotlighted. I'm not sure how much was it, like 10 minutes? Thank you. I can count fingers though. Thanks, Joey. Okay. So I'm going back through the steps right now, and I'm on a 4 step, and I didn't ask my sponsor to take me back through the steps. He's already done that for me. I got with another guy, a good friend of mine, and we decided to do this process together. So we're going back through the steps, and I've got some questions that I have for steps 1, 2, and 3 on to take a good look at for someone who's been through the steps and taken people through the steps, but wants to go back through maybe for a little bit of a deeper experience. And if anybody wants that, please send me an email. I'll make sure my email address is in the chat. And please send me an email and I'll send it over to you. You can do whatever you want with it. So I'm looking at these questions now. Now, I knew that it had been a while since I'd been back through the steps, and I like to do this periodically. And I thought, I'm doing pretty good. I got a couple of things I could probably write inventory on. So I'm going to go ahead and go back through the steps with my good friend Shannon, and we're going to, take a look at some stuff. We'll do this together, and then I'll have a little bit of inventory to write, and then we'll rock on. So I go through this with these questions for current experience with step 1, and here I'll just read some of them to you. Here's some questions you can ask yourself. In what ways have I been living like I don't have alcoholism? How have I rested on my laurels? What parts of the program have I been unwilling to do? What parts of the program have become mechanical, like I'm just checking the boxes? Any of you guys do a review and you're like, da, 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 done, and hit send, send a quick one into your sponsor, or say a few prayers while the car's warming up on your way to work. When it becomes mechanical, give your sponsee a little bit of life advice, a little life coaching, and then hang up and rock on. Yeah, I see some of these. I see some expressions on there. I know some of you guys do that too. How about these? In what ways have I let my spiritual condition slide or get stagnant? Where have I been living in self-will, harboring resentment, unwilling to forgive, dwelling in self-pity, keeping secrets, or holding on to fear? Oh, what I started to notice is I've got a lot of answers to questions that I was completely unaware of. How am I restless, irritable, or discontented? Can I be alone, quiet, and peaceful without something to distract me? Here's another question. What do I obsess about that is wrong with the world or not going my way? Am I a keyboard gangster on social media? Am I am I acting like a principled, God-reliant man in traffic on the internet? Uh, what do I complain about? What do I worry about? Where do I play victim or martyr? All this stuff is tied into my spiritual condition. What parts of my life are currently unmanageable? How are they unmanageable? Relationships, emotional state, thought life, work, romance, on, AA, so on. Where am I being dishonest, lying, misrepresenting myself, living a double life, being a fraud? Here's a big one, a lack of transparency. And then here's the kicker. If those don't disturb you, try this one. How have I been acting in ways that are outside my sane and sound ideal or don't line up with my God-given values? And guys, I got to tell you, when I answered these questions, I was disturbed. I thought I had a couple of things I could throw on an inventory real quick, smooth sailing right through the 12 steps, and I could come on to a meeting like this and tell you, yeah, I just worked the 12 steps last month. I work them the 12 steps periodically so that I can stay awake and blah, blah, blah. No, well, here's what I can tell you is my life depends on this process. And what I found out when I went back through my current experience with steps one, two, and three is I forgot. I forgot. I'm living in many ways just like a guy who does not have a hopeless, progressive, fatal illness because I forgot. And here's the thing. In my experience with the people that I know, the people that I've learned from, the people that are learning from me, the people I'm walking this path with, I think we all forget to a certain extent at some point in our lives. We forget. We forget. And that's why I've got to continue to revisit this, continue to look at this. And often we look at this when we're sitting down taking someone through the steps. How often have you sit across from a new sponsee and told them what we do? Here's what we do. In your mind, you're thinking, I'm not doing that. Or we're talking about how you can tell if someone's really surrendered to this program because you're going to see them making all their amends, and then you're thinking, ooh, I've got a couple I need to make that I still haven't made. I remember my first sponsor. I got my first sponsee, and I told my sponsor I was proud, and I couldn't wait to hear his words of wisdom. And he said to me, "Welcome to the world of hypocrisy." I was like, that's what you have to say? I mean, come on. But I think that ties in well to this. And I can tell you that what I found before I started this process again, a little while ago, is that I would find myself talking to a sponsee and he would be going through a struggle similar to mine. And this is God giving me a little slap, a little nudge. And he would be going through something similar to me. And then I would find myself inspired to say to him whatever I said to him. And what I would be thinking is, I don't know if he even heard that, but wow, do I need to hear it? Because what I'm telling him that he could do, I'm not doing. And I think that God speaks to some of us directly. There are some of you in this room right now who God speaks to you directly on a regular basis. I've got a little bit of experience with that. It's funny because Julie talks about, she's one of those who's really in touch with energy and there's a mind-body connection. She dreams something that happened to her sister and then she finds out the next day it actually happened. I mean, she says the veil is thin. For me, the veil is thick. God rarely speaks to me, but that's okay. That's okay. I understand that is not, I know people where the veil is thin and they suffer and cause more harm than I do. And I know people where that have never had that, that live a very spiritual life. So, so sometimes God speaks to me directly every now and then. Often God speaks to me through you. I'll hear you say something and I'm like, wow. Thank you, God. I'm looking, I'm like, I don't even see you there. I just see God. So, but then what's really cool is sometimes God speaks to me through me when I'm helping somebody else. And that's the real slap in the face. It's like, come on, buddy. Well, are you going to hear this or not? You know. So, what I've noticed is going back through this process. We were at an event down in Delaware just not long ago, and my good friend Nicoletta had done a talk on step one. And I remember after her talk, I was like, she really got in touch with how disturbing it is when we wake up and realize we're powerless. And she talked about how disturbing step one, how there's no good news in step one. And I remember that. I remember when that guy Dave sat down with me outside that clubhouse and he 12-stepped me, I was deeply disturbed. And I've watched it happen with guys I've gotten to work with. And when we're doing that, when we're 12-stepping somebody, it's important that we understand that we're not there to share our experience, strength, and hope. We're there to give them a fatal dose of alcoholism, a fatal dose of addiction. We want them to understand that they have no hope, that there is no hope. On your power, you're not going to get the job done. On your power, you're in bad shape. That's the message that I want to get across, but I want to do it using my own experience. I want to let this guy know how hopeless I am, and hopefully he can identify and see how hopeless he is. So that's kind of the idea there. And I've seen lots of guys very disturbed, just like I was. But now what's really interesting is when I go back through the steps and look at my current experience with step one, with 23 years of sobriety, how disturbed I am at what I found in step one. And guys, that's the goal. That's the goal. Because I really believe that all of us go through a place where we forget. And I need to get back in touch with that disturbance. I need to realize that one of the characteristics of my illness is that my mind tells me I don't have it. And I got to get back in touch with that. And what that does, step one creates a why so that I can move into the how in the rest of the steps. Or maybe better yet, better said, steps one, two, and three create the why. This is why I need the program of action. Now tell me how to do it. So, because guys, I am not going to work this program consistently, thoroughly for the long haul unless I'm clear that I have to. Now, don't get me wrong. I love what I get out of it. Just like going to the gym. First time I went to the gym, I felt uncomfortable. I felt weak. I saw the guys with the big muscles pumping iron. I'm like, man, I'm not like them. I don't even know what I'm doing. This feels stupid. It hurts. I don't like this, everything. And then I start doing it and I start to like the results. And then I fall in love with the process. And that's exactly what's happened to me in the 12 steps. In the 12 steps, I started to do it because I had to. And then over time, I began to love the results that I got. And then I began to fall in love with the process. And today, I love to meditate. I not a huge fan of writing inventory, but I love the results that I get when I write inventory and I make amends and I actually look forward to the promise of what's on the other side of 4 through 9. I love to have those deep conversations with a high level of accountability. I love to sit down and work with somebody and carry this message. I love these gifts. I love to do this. So it's not something that I have to do so I'll stay clean. It's something that I know that I am aware that I must do, but it's also something that I love to do. But I can tell you this, the love to do it won't sustain it. Bill Wilson talked about, and I'm going to paraphrase this and I'm probably going to screw it up, but he talked about 2 reasons to seek God in recovery. Reason number one was because of the gifts of developing a conscious contact with God. God's saying, come on, Chad, I have more and more available. There's more freedom, there's more peace, there's more sense of purpose, there's more gifts. Come on, I have more. Continue to seek me. But right behind me, I got methamphetamine saying, Chad, I'll kill you if you don't find God. And I've got to stay in touch with that because I'm powerless over that. I'm powerless over it when it's in me, and I'm powerless over it when it's over there sitting on the table and I'm stone cold sober. And I've got to stay in touch with that. I do not have the power of choice today. Using is still an option today. I must remember that I qualify for this, that the problem has been removed. That's my experience. That's how I react so long as I keep in fit spiritual condition. I didn't remove the problem. It has been removed. I didn't do it. That power did it. And that's how I can keep that status so long as I live in fit spiritual condition. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on my laurels. It's easy to let up and rest on what I've done in the past that's gotten me to where I am today. I'm headed for trouble if I do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. I am not cured. What I have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. How do I maintain? How do I grow? How do I continue to move through this spiritual awakening and stay conscious of the presence of God? How do I do that? It's so simple. It's just what's lined out in this book. I just follow the simple directions as they're laid out in this book. And I have a home group and I stay involved. I connect with the fellowship and I be of service. And that's the real solution. That's what the founders of this program understood that no one had understood up to this point. That's what they found out. The solution to alcoholism is to carry this message to other alcoholics, but we don't do it by ourselves. The solution is to become a vessel so that God can work through me to help somebody else. To live in a state of surrender so that God can work through me to carry this message to help somebody else. And that's why we need steps 1 through 11. To live in a state of surrender, to get cleared out, cleaned up, to open the path in steps 4 through 9, and to live there in steps 10 and 11 so that I can become an open channel, a vessel for God to work through me to help the next guy. And that's why we do what we do. Thanks for having me.